Welcome to the Singapore Botanic Gardens. Er, this is the NUS Law Campus at Bukit Timah, and that's their automatic lawnmower. Let's try that again. Welcome to the Botanic Gardens. Oh, hi again, little guy. These lawnmowers are everyday sights for the law students at NUS Bukit Timah campus, commonly referred to as BTC, as they pass through the Botanic Gardens to get to and from the train station. Hence, unexpectedly, these unassuming pieces of technology, along with the lawns which they are tasked to manicure, are manifestations of the symbolic association between the gardens and the law campus, between nature and urbanity. Consequently, they reveal to us the shortcomings of the Botanic Gardens, its inability to forefront itself in the imagined communities of the law students who traverse it almost every day. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Hello, my name is Louis, and I intend on investigating how the Botanic Gardens situate themselves alongside a key element of the Singaporean national identity, namely the Garden City. How does the Garden City manifest in the conscience and everyday actions of BTC law students as they interact with one of Singapore's foundational pieces of natural architecture? I sat down and interviewed NUS law students and spent a day on site to find out. Through the course of this video, I will be zooming into some common words and phrases which appeared during my interviews. Here is a quick preview. Firstly, we'll be focusing on the phrase UNESCO World Heritage Site, which goes hand in hand with how my interviewees saw the Botanic Gardens as largely for tourists. When I asked them to reflect on how the Botanic Gardens might contribute to their conception of Singapore's garden city, they cite its status as a protected and internationally recognized heritage site, as well as its aesthetic value to tourists. In other words, they do not seem to think that it offers much in the way of building their personal connection to the garden city. It is not a way by which they can engage with or invest in the nation's imagined community. Which is interesting, because in historical terms, the Botanic Gardens were undoubtedly an instrumental organ through which the garden city was formed and legitimized. Nigel B. Taylor wrote in his chapter for the book City in a Garden that the Botanic Gardens has become part of the everyday social and natural environment of the city-state, that there are many Singaporeans whose lives are connected with its endearing landscape. Not only does its natural expanse offer a respite from the stresses of urban life, but the Botanic Gardens has also served as a starting point for the modern greening of Singapore. Even its status as a UNESCO World Heritage Site is predicated on how the space is reflective of cultural shifts, as it evolved from a colonial botanic garden to an economic garden and finally to a modern institution for research, conservation, and education. The Botanic Gardens narrative is embedded into the nation's building process, and hence imagined community. However, the people who recognize and engage with an imagined community are not a monolith. From my interviews, I've learned that there are other things that scream Garden City more to certain people. The trees on the roadside, or the impressive eco-technological architectural feats like the gardens by the bay or the flower dome, which are capable of selling that Garden City image on the global stage. Or even wildlife reserves, which are prime examples of Singapore's biodiversity and the national mission to preserve the island's nature. The Botanic Gardens may serve as an important icon of Singapore's ecological and cultural development, at least according to the state narrative. But not everyone interacts with the Botanic Gardens in conscious reflection of its heritage or how it plays into the garden city. Tourists absolutely are more likely to be engaging with the imagined community when traveling purposefully into the Botanic Gardens. They may have come to learn more about Singapore's past, or they may look at the natural architecture of a world-famous botanical garden and compare Singapore's garden city with their own society. Therefore, when my interviewees dismiss that the Botanic Gardens are for tourists, it implies that their primary symbolic attachments to the space are generated by a different, purposeful engagement. Which brings us to another common theme among the NUS law students in their relationship with the Botanic Gardens. It is a rather transient relationship that is inconvenient in the context of day-to-day transit, while being occasional in its recreational benefits. What you're seeing now is a time-lapse of the walk from BTC to the Botanic Gardens MRT station. It is an unsheltered 8 to 10 minute route that the law students have to traverse at least 3 times a week. In Singapore's tropical climate, this means that it is either very hot or very humid. The students regularly don formal attire for certain classes and activities, only adding to the discomfort. And when it rains, it pours. If they're not armed with umbrellas, it is a race to the finish and they'd be drenched either way. Once in a while, you get stories of unfortunate students getting swarmed by sandflies even as they're just walking through. So, of course, they would rather not spend a second longer in the gardens than they have to. The environment is hostile to their daily commute, which has fostered an antagonism towards the botanic gardens in their collective memory. The walk is a purposeful engagement with the space that has built largely negative symbolic attachments among the students. The fact that it is an everyday embodied practice with stories often shared within their real, not imagined, community lends to the strength of these webs of meaning built by the shared negative experience of the walk. The Botanic Gardens also serves another function for law students as a space for recreation and relaxation. However, only a few of my interviewees utilized the gardens for this purpose, and it was only on some occasions. Provided the weather was nice, they would sometimes stroll through the area while chatting with friends. If their families lived nearby, they would walk their dogs there. I only had one interviewee who admitted to liking the heat and enjoyed picnicking under the sun. Nevertheless, even those who recognize the ecological or recreational value of the gardens rarely choose to go there if they aren't forced to walk through it. In the final chapter for A City in a Garden, Barnard and Heng highlight how the greening of Singapore is motivated by the belief that problems in society were rooted in the structure of modern cities, which would only become sustainable if there was a balance with nature. The Botanic Gardens, which is right beside the law campus, is a place that ostensibly offers the students an escape to balance their urban stresses with the enrichment of nature. So, why do these students express an avoidance from the gardens? Ultimately, that is because of our final set of words, which signify an impression that the Botanic Gardens is manicured and artificial. This is where we return to the lawnmowers, man-made tools for the maintenance of natural artifice, greenery that has been manipulated into a form that benefits humanity. Since the lawnmowers serve as a direct association between the Botanic Gardens and BTC, they implicate the gardens. They demonstrate that the gardens are as man-made as the pristine white colonial pillars of BTC, under which the very human-focused field of law is housed. They blur the line between nature and urbanity. While Barnard and Heng emphasize this blurred line by revealing the way nature in Singapore has been arranged and functionalized around nation building, they, along with Taylor in the same book, are perhaps too optimistic in their analysis of the Botanic Gardens as a green solution to the concrete jungle. According to the lived experiences of law students at BTC, the Botanic Gardens fails as a refuge because the nature reminds them of the exact institution responsible for that stress. After 4 years of education under NUS law, the one interviewee who enjoyed picnicking under the sun at the gardens no longer goes there for fun, as she would be acutely aware of its geographic and symbolic proximity to the law campus. Instead of acting as a getaway from the concrete jungle, the gardens instead proves to the students that they are still trapped within it. The Botanic Gardens is inarguably an icon of Singapore's Green Revolution, thanks in no small part to its World Heritage status and its historical contributions to the Garden City. That being said, the lived experiences of NUS law students provide an interesting perspective with which to observe the shortcomings of the Botanic Gardens, even as it tries to affirm the imagined community of the Garden City. The natural space is collectively seen as a consistent, everyday obstacle that students need to overcome through the walk. Manicured lawns are furthermore an enduring reminder of one's entrapment within urbanity. It is therefore unsurprising that PTC students are repulsed by the gardens on a conscious level, which might have led to them subconsciously deferring to other iconic pieces of natural architecture in their engagement with the imagined community. After all, what seems to be the case is that the Garden City is normally associated with nature as a positive. To the law students at BTC, the Botanic Gardens proves an aspect of nature that antagonizes their daily life, and thus it is difficult to conceptualize it as contributing to the larger Garden City identity. Instead, the students themselves may relate to the automatic mower. Even as it rains, it is forced to keep working on the lawns of manicured grass bounded by the walls of a concrete jungle.